Alright, as you can see, I've already started my install. Started gluing them in, and you can see the squeeze out, which is what I want, because that way I know I've got plenty of adhesive in there. One of the things you can do is that when you're putting this adhesive on there, is that you can put it on, go ahead and give it a good firm push. You want to make sure all the mating surfaces, both on the horizontal and the vertical, are bonded to your substrate. You notice I've already pulled the tape, and this stuff is fresh. I mean, I just put it on, but it's got a really good initial adhesion, especially for this tile where you got 2 points of contact both on the horizontal and the vertical. If I was using a tile for some reason that it was just a face tile for the vertical face here, then I probably would have went ahead and taped it, because, well, gravity's a bitch. It'll work against you. Even with this good adhesive, it'll start to sag and drop. So I would tape that, but in this particular case I don't. Now what I'm going to do is, once this adhesive is dry, or it's starting to set up, like this one here, this is some of the first tile I did, I'll take a putty knife or a screwdriver and I'll go ahead and remove that squeeze out. Here's my corners. I'll show you this one over here. They're both the same. They both turned out pretty decent. A little bit wide, but I kind of made up the difference. I'm using 1/4-inch tile spacers here, and I'm going to use the 1/4-inch here, and then when I lay my flat tile, I'm probably going to go down to 1/8 of an inch, or maybe even a 1/16. It depends on how well my grout does, and I'm going to need to think about that a little bit more. And the reason is I don't want big grout joints on top here, because when you go to clean your grout off, it's going to dish a little bit. It's going to be a little bit concave in your grout joints, and that'll just be a place for crud to collect and whatnot. So the smaller your joints up on top, the better off you are. The reason I went with a 1/4-inch here, well, to be honest, one reason was to economize on this. Like I said, I ran short. I needed 34 and I could only find 32. And like I mentioned on the bathroom installation before, I had to call 8 different Home Depots in 2 different states, and I still didn't find the exact shade code that I was looking for, but I found something that was very close. You've got to get right down and look at it to tell that it's not exactly the same. So I was happy with that way that turned out, and I got lucky. But this stuff here, there was no finding anything else to match it. That's the thing about Home Depots, is that you think they're standardized, but they're not. They get different shipments to different stores. Like, I know there's some towns that have 2 or maybe even more Home Depots in them, and you go to one Home Depot and what you find is completely different from the one on the other side of town. So this is my red-headed stepchild. This is as close as I could come to matching that initial tile that I bought, and it's, well, to be fair, it's not even close. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick it back here. This is your alcove for the refrigerator, and I'm going to put it back in here, and it won't be severely noticeable, so we'll go with it like that. Here's my other 45 that I cut, and like I said, this is really not a complete how-to. Like, I would need a tripod and a different camera. What I can do is show you a little bit of how I set this tile saw up. And here's a practice cut. I did have an extra tile, so I made a practice cut on this one. And what you have here is you got your fence, there's your blade. It's a steel blade with industrial diamond coating on the ridge here. So I can get down a little bit closer to this ridge at the top is industrial diamond. Underneath here is your water reservoir, and that's your fill line. That's what you want to go no higher than that. And I'll warn you ahead of time, cutting these 45s requires you to have your blade guard up, and a lot of times up like that, and you are going to get wet doing this. Here's my britches. I don't know if you can see that, but I am soaked. My shirt's soaked. I already squeezed a lot of the water out. This is your fence, and this is your miter gauge here. What I did is I set this to a 45 and clamped it down. Now, you know, you can go through all this and make sure this is all zeroed out and whatnot, but to be honest with you, this is not finished carpentry. It's ceramic tile. Even with everything zeroed out, nothing is ever going to really wind up perfect on these rigs. There's just too much play in your fence and whatnot. So it's good enough. It's close. It'll look good. But like I said, by no means is it finished carpentry. So what I like to do is I like to make my 45-degree cut on this part here first. And the way you do that is you would set this in your rip fence. Now you notice that you got a lot of wobble here. Okay, and one of the things that you can do is take your combination square. Again, I'm doing all this one-handed, and you're going to set it up so that it'll measure a 90-degree angle for you against the table of the saw. And I put it like this, then I pulled this back, and that'll give it a pretty much square. It'll give you a fairly decent square there. You're rested against this face of the miter, and you're going to rest against that face, that corner, such as that. You're going to set that there, and what I did is I took my tape measure and I measured across, and it gave me, it's kind of hard to tell, but it's basically 3/4 of an inch between this face here and the inside of this tile. So what I did, if I can find it, is I got me a scrap piece of this 3/4 inch from the countertop base, and I cut it and I stick it down in there like that, and that helps me keep this stable, keeps it at a halfway decent 90 in relation to the table. And when I was cutting it, you know, you want to make sure that you stay square and push back against the miter in both directions, and then you slide in and make your cut. Now, like I said, I think this is a 7-inch blade, which is what the majority of your DIY home improvement type people are going to get or rent. They do have bigger models. I have one. I just didn't feel like going and getting it, and it worked out fairly decent. So when you're going to actually need to make 2 cuts on this, because as you can see, the blade is only going to cut halfway through that tile. So once you get that initial cut made, and when you cut in this, like I said, you're going to get wet. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, because the lowest you can have this guard is about like that. So all that water that blade's picking up is just going to splash back here and get you. So be aware that you don't try not to get your cabinets wet or your walls or whatever else is going to be behind you. You're going to catch most of the water, but you will get splatter. Loosen this up. So once you make your initial cut, then you're going to need to flip your tile over and go back into the blade with this part like this to finish out the other half of your cut. And what I like to do is I like to get up right under it and kind of course you'll still have the piece here, but you'll see your top cut, your top kerf here, and I like to set it up to where it's almost going to be to the blade. This cut is going to almost match up, but not quite. And the reason for that is I'll go ahead and make my initial cut and it'll be close. I'll bring it back and then I'll just slide the tile a little bit and then go back into it, and I might have to do that twice to even that cut out. But you can, you know, I prefer to err on the side of caution and not take off too much, because you can always cut more off, but you can't put it back on. And when you're limited in tile like I am, any mistake could be a deal breaker. So anyway, that's how I cut that 45. And when you set this here against this miter, you're gonna get it up against this face here. So you don't necessarily need to have it push all the way back in that corner for stability. You just rest it on that face and get a good grip on it like that, and you'll be able to hold it in place and do your cut the way you need to. Now when you're measuring these 45s out, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can do it like this. You get yourself a nice 45-degree cut, and then you measure how much tile you're going to need, and this is just, you know, by gosh and by golly right here. But you can measure with a tape measure or steel ruler and figure out how much tile you need, and then you can go ahead and cut that off. The way I did it, I went ahead and cut my 45s. I measured to cut the 45s. Another way you can do it is you don't necessarily need to cut that. You know, wish I had another piece with the 45, but anyway, you can just get a nice 45 and just run the tile out as far as it'll go, and then you can put your following tiles in place with your spacers, and then when you get down here, you're going to need to cut this off, because this is going to be, you know, if you left that a full tile with a 45, then when you get down here, these tiles would actually be out to right around in here somewhere. Then you can measure this and cut this down. And when you're cutting these tiles, just a straight flat cut or a straight 90-degree cut, this tile saw will do that with no problem. You just make sure you got your guide here zeroed in, and then you just lay it up in there, turn your saw on, and make your cut. The reason I went ahead and cut my 45s to length is because I like to keep these factory edges. These tiles, they're not completely flat all the way across. When you start to get to the edge, they actually have a slight curve in, and then you got your pattern there. So I like to keep the factory edges as much as I can. When I can't, you know, I do have to make cuts, like over here, that end tile right there, I had to cut about 2 inches off of it, maybe less than 2 inches, about 1.5 inches. And so I cut it off. My cut joint is against the wall. When I grout these in. I can throw some grout in there to finish it out. I didn't make a big huge gap in there, but or I can just caulk it. But when you make those cuts, this is where one of these tools come in handy. And I wish I had a tripod or something. And what this is it's a dressing stone or a finishing stone, and they make this is a fine grit one. Over here, I probably don't have it with me, but they've got a coarse grit stone. It's a black stone, and that's for dressing edges. You make a cut and it didn't get quite flush all the way across, you can finish it off with that stone. But that finer white stone there, and this is another option here. This is a tile file, and you've got a really rough edge here, or surface here, and then on the other side you got a fine surface. And what I do when I have to make cuts, I like to dress these edges, because sometimes you'll get chips in them, such as, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but there's a little chip right there in the finish. And I'll take this stone and I'll carefully, especially right here, this is really fragile, this tip here, you don't want to break that off. But I'll take that stone and I'll just round it off, such as this, and dress that edge, try to clean some of those chips up in the finish, because when you grout that, a lot of times you will see that, because it'll collect a little bit of grout, and you'll see it. So I take that finishing stone and I dress these edges down, or you can take a file, the fine file. Like I said, you got this rough side here. I guess the rough side would be more for, like, you can see where there's a ridge there, because like I said, I had to cut this in twice, once here and then flip it over and cut this side. It's not enough for me to worry about, but if you wanted to, you could use that rough side of that tile file to clean that up. And anytime I make a cut in tile, that's what I do. I dress the edge, and it just gives it a more professional look. And when you go to grout it, you'll have less noticeable chips in your tile, in the face of your tile. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this last one here, and get that installed, and then I'll go ahead and get this cleaned up and my countertop here, and then I'll go ahead and start laying out my other tile. And I know I didn't mention it before, but one other thing here with this sink cutout, I had the advantage of having that old countertop, and so I got my measurements off of that. And I'm probably going to reuse the sink that came out, even though it's pretty nasty from paint and cleaning up paint brushes and whatnot. It should clean up fine as a stainless steel sink. If you got a new sink, then the packaging of the sink itself, or either inside of it or on the cardboard box that the sink comes in itself, it'll have a template for this cut, making this cut here. And so you just lay that up on top, strike your line, and get your jigsaw or your saber saw, whatever you want to call it, and drill a pilot hole. I do it in each corner, 3/8 inch pilot hole, and that lets me set my blade down in there, and then I can make my cuts. It can get kind of difficult if you're dealing with a countertop that you purchased, because you have this backsplash back in here. I'm going to set my sink back a little bit further than what you can do with a commercial pre-made countertop, and that way the reason I did that is because I didn't want too thin of a piece of ceramic tile here. This gives me probably a little bit over an inch, maybe 1.25 inches, that I can put a nice big piece of tile in there, and back there gives me about 1 inch when I put that tile in, and then I know I'll have good adhesion and a stable piece of tile that I don't have to worry about it, ever failing. So basically that's it. I'm going to cut that last piece of tile over there, get that installed, and clean up my squeeze out, my glue squeeze out, and then I'll start laying out the other tile. All right.